Okay?
Okay, let me ask you, what is OD?
Okay,
Because I've been hearing so much about OD, but I'm really
Okay.
interested to know more about it.
Okay. Well, again, I mean, OD can be defined, I think, in many ways, but probably the definition that I'd like to use is that it's a sequence of planned change efforts inside an organization. And usually that is top-down, so it basically emanates out of the top leadership. And they want to change something in the way of how people are interacting with each other, how the organization is set up from the people's perspective. And through these efforts and activities, you will realize at the end of the day a boost in the effectiveness and efficiency of the organization. Now, the way I try to kind of simplify OD is that I contrast it with an equally important effort, which is BD, or business development, okay? Business development is trying to enhance the corporation vis-a-vis what's external. So vis-a-vis the markets, vis-a-vis the clients, products and services. Now, if you kind of reverse that internally in the organization and you want to enhance the corporation from a people's perspective, from a cultural perspective, then basically that's OD.
So if I understood right, so OD reflects the change, some kind of change management inside the organization
Definitely.
that actually would support your business development outside the organization.
Not necessarily support, but complement.
Complement.
Because if you build the organization externally, you would still have the ceiling, which is the capability of people, how people interact, how they view other people and things and events, the culture that binds them together, their willingness to pay attention to people, to pay attention to productivity. So it doesn't really kind of necessarily support BD only, it complements it into a holistic offering which enhances the effectiveness and efficiency of the corporation in general.
Okay, let's just set an example. Simple example. Let's say,
Sure.
for example, that an organization is going through a new project. Okay, so in any field, construction. Okay, just building a building. Okay, so how would OD complement?
Okay. Again,
Simply.
OD would not directly go and kind of sort out and help that project directly. However, OD would help that project and other projects through instating the proper people behavior, the proper culture inside the organization. Now, for example, you can have a company that has a problem with its leadership. You can have a company that has a problem with risk-taking. You can have a company that has a problem with innovation and creativity, okay? So what OD tries to do is to kind of cater for these aspects, okay? So build the right culture, okay? To develop the corporation internally, not only from a culture perspective, but one of the things that OD can cater to is business process re-engineering, is total quality management, okay? So again, almost everything that you can imagine that is internal to the organization and will develop it, basically falls under the umbrella of OD.
So what do you think about that?
I'm just going to ask Ashraf the same question. I don't want to keep on bombarding you with questions, but it seems like I don't have a choice. I'm an HR professional. I've been an HR professional for a while. And in my line of work, one of the things that we look for is people engagement, okay? So to engage people, you have to set the culture, you have to set the environment, you have to set the standards and everything. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this is very much what you're talking about when you're looking at organizational development from that standpoint, that you're getting employees or people engaged, you're making them feel loyal, committed, and wanting to push their company. And definitely this all starts with management, because if you have a directive management, your employees will just be following like set pathways, set things, their loyalty levels they wouldn't be that much, they wouldn't have that much initiative, they wouldn't do this, they wouldn't do that. In corporate Egypt, or in the Egyptian world, basically, so to speak, I don't know how far OD is. I do hear a lot that there are OD professionals, not that I know what they do. In my line of work, we do not have OD professionals at all, but what we try to instill is the culture, the values of the company, and this And that's what we're trying to do from an HR perspective rather than an organizational development perspective. So
Sure.
how can you help me on that?
Okay. Well, again, I think, I believe that we still have a predicament in how OD is defined and is valued and is treasured, basically, not only in Egypt, but in the Middle East in general. And I think we have borrowed this dilemma, basically, from the international landscape, because believe it or not, we are still having problems with defining OD on a global level. Historically, OD emerged basically as a humanistic democratic movement to kind of counter the systematic, the mechanistic inclinations that people had in antiquity. Starting off, for example, with Frederick Taylor and how he kind of mechanized the way that people are behaving in organizations. But people got kind of frustrated with that, and they wanted to go back to the grassroots, to their humanistic nature. They always believed that control mechanisms are just interim, and once basically you have everything in motion, you should empower people and delegate things. Another problem that people sensed basically was that people next to action were not the people that were empowered to make the decisions, or what we call the people next to the coalface, and people higher up in the echelons of the company that weren't really knowledgeable on what was happening did the decisions. So it was a humanistic democratic movement that wanted to kind of put the human element back into the corporate workplace, okay? And we're still not there yet. Still, many people have many definitions of OD. Some people think that OD should be oriented towards the hard side of the organization, as I said, business process reengineering, total quality management. Other people believe that it should be inclined more to the soft side of the organization, so kind of having this very collegial relationship between the manager and the subordinate, very broad spans of control and short chains of command, and people are extremely empowered and they are led by love, more or less, and not by coercion. So we're still suffering from that on the Middle Eastern and the Egyptian arena. We have yet to reach this definition. So this is, I think, one of the problems that we're facing. The other problem is that OD doesn't seem to me as being something that you can do for life. You kind of reach a ceiling early on in your career. If you're a middle manager in OD, well, that's good. If you want to advance, you would have to shift towards the broader arena of human resources. So again, it does not provide a career path up to retirement. And I think this is, again, one of the problems. A third problem that I have seen is that because OD is not well defined and it's kind of inclined more to a humanistic, democratic route, you kind of fail sometimes to link it with the objectives of the company. Many companies have what is called a balanced scorecard. So there would be a part about people, and then there would be a part about the internal process of the organization, a part about the customer and financials. And if you cannot provide a cause and effect between what you do as an OD professional and the different bits and pieces of the balanced scorecard up till affecting the percentage points of the objectives that top leadership has in mind, well, it's not going to really be appreciated. A fourth problem is the willingness, ability, and readiness of top leadership to sponsor the activity, because if you're talking about a holistic, organization-wide change will have resistors, and there would be plenty of stumbling basically along the way and hurdles along the way. If you do not have basically a heavyweight that gives you that support, that leverage, you're going to be stopped cold in your tracks. And this is presently the problem that I'm facing in a major consultancy that I'm doing outside of Egypt within the Middle East. I have this great OD plan with 8 programs and 28 initiatives basically spanning different gaps within the culture, right? But at the end of the day, top leadership does not want to sponsor it. They want HR to sponsor it. But then HR has a limited latitude. HR would not tend to go into conflicts with directors and change, for example, their competency models or change their performance management systems, okay? Sometimes you are denied access to the strategic part of the organization, which is the strategic apex that has the core leadership. Without infiltrating core leadership, you don't really have much of a chance for your OD to be effective because they have to drive it at the end of the day. So I mean, definitely a couple of hurdles. This is not to say that I'm not enthusiastic about OD. I'm extremely enthusiastic because I think that one of the ways that we can leapfrog other nations, basically, other regions in the Middle East, is through understanding the human being and unleashing the potential of the human being and kind of putting that culture that really propagates the meaning of humanity. And I do not see that happening. Currently, I see that OD is one of the salvations basically there. So being enthusiastic is one thing, but that does not prevent me from saying that there are many, many issues that we have.
Quite a challenge that you have.
Definitely, I mean, yeah, it's a huge challenge, definitely. Uphill battles at times. Makes it all the more fun.
Yeah.
Okay, in the Egyptian arena, basically speaking, if you're looking at the majority of the emerging companies, a lot of them would be subsidiaries to international companies, and some of them are local companies that have grown very big, but they're usually owned by a family or a person or. And with the Egyptian culture and perspectives of how to run a company, which is basically built on history of 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, and how things were run, not from a democratic aspect, rather from a completely different aspect. How do you see OD even flourishing in such areas? Or is there a time span? How would we, I mean, as a group, basically speaking, if we're so into OD and we really believe the value of OD, what can anybody do? How can HR help? How can business development help? How can we change the mindset of the leaders to understand the value? Again, everything has to translate into numbers at the end of the day.
That's a very good question. I think, Mona here, time is the best healer. Now, if you kind of go back in history with your memory, 10 years back basically in the Egyptian landscape, it would be very hard to find somebody who carries the title of HR director on his or her card, right? Now, as time advanced, things began to pick up. I recall maybe like 6 or 7 years back, we did not have nearly as much soft skills training as we have right now. Soft skills training is advancing in a big way. We have pretty advanced mechanisms in training like business simulations. So I think that as humanity is progressing, as people are kind of trying different mechanisms, they have tried mechanistic organizations and it didn't work. They moved on to organic organizations and it provided some dividends. But then they noticed that they need to be much more open, so they tried network organizations and they still want to be more open. They're trying cybernetic organizations, right? So people are kind of, by trial and error, understanding that they have to gravitate towards their humanistic nature more and more. We have seen basically the debacle that has happened behind the economic slowdown, and it was primarily funded by greed. The problems of the financial markets and the so-called derivatives, and kind of slicing and dicing and playing with financial instruments, and we were not really transparent in doing so, we're not really honest with people. And what has this